Good afternoon. I'm Dori Kelner. I'm managing partner at Sleight of Hand Studios, and we are a digital agency focused entirely on implementation in Drupal. We've been around since 2004. We're women-owned, and we work mostly with mission-based organizations, so mission-driven organizations, nonprofits, associations, and government entities. In my spare time, people know me as a wine educator and also as a yogi. So I spread my time around a whole lot of fun things to do aside from Drupal. But today we're going to talk about content audits, which is a very dry topic. So I'm going to try to start out by making this a little more fun. So I'd like you all to be very brave. I'd like you to be brave and tell me, do you have a drawer or a closet or a room in your house that looks like this? Be brave, come on. Everyone, right? I once dated someone who had an entire room that looked like this, and it took me 2 years to get into that room and find out what it looked like. Okay? People hoard. People keep things that they don't need. And when you're looking for something in this drawer and you don't find it, what do? You walk away.
You don't have it.
You don't have it. Exactly. You don't have it anymore. So what do you do next? You go out and you buy it again. And then you put it back in the drawer, and then you look for it, and it's not in the drawer again the next time you need it. And then finally you say, you know what? Just like that room, you know what? I'm not going back in that drawer again. I'm done. I'm going to go to some other place and get what I need. This is not really different than most websites. When we hoard content, when we say all our content has to always be forever on our website, it's the same as this junk drawer. People come to the site and they're looking for something, but you have so much, and so much of it probably isn't relevant anymore, or it's out of date. It ruins your credibility. People can't find what they're looking for, and they go someplace else. So that's what this is about today, is identifying how we can better evaluate our content so that people don't walk away. And I want to read you a short story. You lie awake at night thinking about your content. There's so much to fix, so much to plan for. You want to get ahead, but you can barely keep up with what's happening day to day. The last time you tried talking to somebody about the big picture, the conversation was cut short by yet another content emergency that puts you right back into reactive mode. And the content keeps coming and coming and coming. How many of you have read Christina's seminal work on content strategy? If you haven't, please go get it and read it cover to cover. What we're trying to do is move people away from being reactive to being responsive and proactive in their content. So it's not a matter of just responding to every day-to-day emergency, which leads to the hoarding of your content, but having a very specific understanding of the purpose of your content and who it is for, and making sure that you respond to your audience, you respond to your organization, and you're not being reactive to situations. So we all have some sort of content creation process that looks like this, right? You know, who are we speaking for? Why are we doing it? How are we going to distribute the content? What channels are we going to use? What are we going to create, and when are we going to create it? The things that go hand in hand in content governance. And, users deserve better content. They deserve something more than just a process. So regardless of what your process looks like and how close it is to this, think about, who's my content really for? Is it to satisfy my boss? Is it to satisfy a department? Is it to satisfy the CEO? Or is it to satisfy the users who come to the site? I was at an event apart a couple of weeks ago, and Jeff Zeldman came on and immediately said, web isn't what web used to be. He said, nobody wants to come to your site and read it. Nobody wants to wake up in the morning and say, gee, I wonder what's new on that website. What they want to do is say, I have some task to accomplish, and the faster I can find it and get the heck out of that website, the happier I will be. That is a mind-blowing paradigm. We don't care about eyeballs anymore. We don't care about time on page. What we care about is people responding to our content, making it all about users first. So we started with, mobile first, and then we did content first, and now we're talking users first. And doing a content audit is going to help position your website to respond to what users need, help them find what they need, and get out fast. So why do we really need to do an audit? The audit is in order to accumulate facts. So when we have fact-based decision-making, then the data puts us all on neutral territory. The one thing that I hear all the time from content strategists is that nobody wants to listen to them. People are like, well, you're the content. You'll come in after we build the site. We don't have to worry about the content now. We don't have to spend money on a strategy. We know we have to write content. Well, gee, when you come into from a content audit with facts, with data, this puts you in a position to sit at the table. And that's what I care about, is that content strategists have a seat at every table in the web process. And that is an important seat where it's not subjective. What we say isn't subjective. It has to be taken in an objective way. We have to back it with data. So this gives us credibility at the table. And so credibility to do what? To meet organizational goals, to improve the audience experience. Brand standards, we don't even think about that often, but your content has to be aligned with the brand as well. What context you're communicating in, which channels we're on, using time and money, using resources effectively. Wouldn't it be great if a content strategist can walk in and say, well, we should do this because it's going to save us money? Is somebody going to listen to you then? You say, hey, I'm going to save you money. Okay, sit down, tell us. Right? And just to be able to justify your content projects. So when is the best time to audit? Well, at the very same conference, Mr. Zelfman said, don't ever do a content audit. He said, throw all your content away and start over again. And I even had a little bit of trouble swallowing that one, but I understood what he was saying, and that is that if you've really spent a whole lot of years accumulating content, it's really hard to get through it all and be colored by it and decide what to leave behind. But obviously, if you're going to do a redesign, if you're going to get a new CMS, say you're moving to Drupal now, you're in here because you want to learn about, how do I move my content into Drupal. On some rolling basis, say every quarter, each department might have a different schedule depending on how up-to-date their content needs to be. Just now, just start, make it happen. Okay? So, the goals of the audit are to clean up. So we all know that the people who have those junk drawers and those junk rooms, what happens when they buy a new house? Anyone remember buying a new house and running out of time to pack? And then taking all the junk that was out there and putting it in a box and writing the word junk on it and sealing it up and shipping it with all your stuff to the new house, right? You take it all there. And what happens? 5, 10 years later, you find the box in your basement and it still says junk on it, and you never missed any of it, right? You didn't need it. And that's the goal of the audit, is to really determine who is using the content that we have. Do we really need it? Do we really need to keep it on our website? And what would happen if we took a lot of that content off? Gee, wouldn't it be more easier for our audience to find what they're looking for if they didn't have to look through a whole lot of stuff that didn't matter? or that was out of date, or was totally irrelevant. Okay? I had a client who had events that we inherited their Drupal website, and their events were a blob. That's all it was just one great big blob. So there was no field for date or time or location or speakers or anything. And then after the event, they went into the blob and they started typing in all the sessions. So imagine being at this conference, and you go to this conference, you go to DrupalGovCon's website at the end of the conference, and there's one big long page with every session typed in, and a summary of the session, and links that go, click here, find out more. And they're all linked to all the PowerPoints that people presented. Oh my Lord. Thousands of pages. They're all gone now. Every last one of those pages is gone after we audited them. So helping audiences find your content is a key reason to do an audit. And then also to be able to come up with a new process. How did you get there in the first place? It's probably because you didn't have a process. So let's talk about having a process for creating content. And finally, like I said, I want to justify the need for content strategists. That's always first and foremost in my mind. How do I justify our profession? And so doing the audit will give you the data to help justify why you're in the room. And of course, we're going to start with a discovery. Okay, we're not starting with the spreadsheet that everybody knows from content audits, the big inventory. Yeah, that's in here. That's a few slides away. We're starting with discovery. We want to understand the brand. We want to understand what are people doing. So your job is to ask questions at this point in time, not to look at anything that's out there on the web, but to start asking questions. How's the audience interacting with us? How do we want them to interact with us? Is there a gap in there? What do we have that we can repurpose and reuse? So you're going to just start with an assessment of what you've got and how it's working. And then you're going to roll up your sleeves, because this first piece, this inventory that most people just see as an activity of scraping the website, is a real effort. And it really is maybe a 1 or 2 person heads down long effort. And there are schools of thought that say if you've got less than 5,000 pages, you should look at every single one of them. And that's a heavy lift. If you have a small organization and you don't have a lot of resources and you're wearing multiple hats, reviewing that many pages is probably going to kill you. But there are ways to get around that, and I'm going to give you 2 different options. Option 1 is content sampling. So you're basically looking across your content and trying to get a sample across some aspect. Is it the objectives of the content? Is it all the content for a specific audience? Is it all the content, are we looking at content by traffic, or content by ownership, or content by some taxonomy term? So you just start with one level and you go across your entire website with that concept. You're looking to get into enough content that you start to see patterns. So yes, maybe you won't read 5,000 blog posts, but maybe after reading 100 of them, some patterns start to develop. And once you see the patterns, you're good, and you can move on and do something else. Okay? So you're looking to get like a representative sampling of content. The other thing you can do is a rolling audit, where you basically say different parts of the website are going to be audited at different times. So we're going to start now. We're going to either start in this department or with this particular term, or we're going to start with events. However we want to start, we say, okay, it's a start. We do this month. Next month, we move on to the next topic and go through deep dive everything that's in that topic area. So 2 different ways to keep from having to review 5,000, 10,000, 20,000 pages, but get a representative sample of the content and start looking for patterns. Okay, so what do we do with it? I have divided this presentation up into quantitative work and qualitative work. And we're going to start with the quantitative work, which is, of course, the inventory. So basically, we're going to build some sort of a system for us to evaluate what's already on the website. So whatever subset of content you said you were going to audit, You're going to create a spreadsheet for that. There are lots of tools that will let you scrape the site and get this information. You want to know the URL, you want to know taxonomy, metadata, whatever. You want to identify what audience is associated with each of these pieces of content. And you also want to identify the analytics that go along with each piece of content. You know, how old is the content? How often do people visit it? How long do they stay on it? Whatever is appropriate for your organization, whatever measurements that you use to say this is a successful piece of content, you want to start adding those to the sheet. Okay? And then ultimately you're going to use this sheet to map to a new website. So once you get through this and you say, okay, we're going to get rid of all these pages, this gives you an opportunity then to put in the URLs of on your new website where you're going to do your redirects. So it's a really great opportunity to put everything together in one place. Okay? And then, so you're going to look at your analytics in order to keep this quantitative. We want to say, I need to present page by page how these pages are performing. What are they doing? You know, pick, you know, low page views. That's a no-brainer. Why are these pages here if they have very low page views? Is it to satisfy somebody in the organization? Is that really what we want to do on our website? It opens up the discussion. You're looking at traffic patterns, time spent on the page, how often you modify it. You're looking for pages that have no ownership. And I'm sure in most organizations, most pages don't. It's like, well, who's free to put a page up today? I need this put up now. And so this review of analytics helps bring out all the data for you. And then you want to decide, you know, what KPIs are we going to use? How are we going to how do we measure a successful piece of content? Are we going to say that we want our content in a certain proportion to the audience that's there? You know, maybe I have the public and members and other people and the press all coming to my site. But gee, the section for the press is huge, and we have members who are paying money, and we don't really give them all that much. This is a good time to start evaluating, you know, should we be giving more content to different people? What goals do we have? How do people get to our pages? So this is all very unique to your organization, the measurements that will make sense to you. And then you start digging in. So maybe you look at the top 25 pages and you say, why are these doing so well? Relative to everything else, what makes these different? And start to gain insights as to how your audience is actually using your site. Okay. Maybe we're looking by department because we all know that everybody wants their stuff on the site and whoever screams the loudest gets it. But look by department and say, you know, you have fewer than 50 page views on these pages in your department. Do you need them? Can they go away? But look, you're presenting data. You're not just saying, we don't really need that many pages from you. You're saying, your pages have so few page views in the last year. We need to think about why they belong on the site. You might look at target audience, as I just said. You know, what is your distribution of your audience, and what is the distribution of your page views? Do they align? If they don't align, why? Do we not have enough pages? Do we have too many in one area? And look at revision dates. Everybody's really gung-ho when their site just rolls out, and there's all this nice new content. And then 5 years, you go back and look, and it's like, wow, there's still content that was never touched since 2012, 2013, 2014. I dare say even 2015. If it's older than 2 years, you're not paying attention. Okay? So there's lots of different data points that you can look at. And then what do you do with those data points? You try to identify the non-performing content. And so if you're a content strategist, you're familiar with the term ROT, redundant, out-of-date, and trivial. And we try to understand that in addition to the cost of maintaining all this content on your server, and you know, server space isn't expensive, but it isn't cheap either. I mean, especially if you have lots of PDFs and imagery and all that kind of thing, you're paying for that. So gee, as a content strategist, I can come in and say, We can get rid of some of this content and save storage space. Well, that's a data point somebody's going to listen to. But in addition to that, content basically has a shelf life. And as I said, it's not a place to archive your information. So, since audiences get overwhelmed with too much content, since they can't find what they're looking for, since the content gets old, it's time to get rid of the non-performing content. So redundancy, we're going to start here. What redundancy means is that content is repetitive, overwordy, the same information's in multiple places. I have a client who, every time a member calls and says, I can't find something, they just stick it again in another part of the website. They they couldn't find it in this menu, so they're going to go put it in another menu item. It's like, to me, I don't expect them to understand there's an architecture problem if somebody can't find something. That says to me it's an architecture problem. But what a lot of content creators do is then go, we need to make that more prominent on our site. We need to put that in multiple places. And especially if you're not in Drupal, if you're in Drupal, at least maybe you have a repeating block or a view that's pulling the same content out of multiple things. But if you're not in Drupal and you've changed it in 20 different places, and now 18 of them say one thing and 2 say another, and 2 weeks later 14 of them say one thing and 6 say another, oh my gosh, how do you possibly keep up with that? So we want to get rid of redundancy. You're going to look at pages that aren't frequently visited. You're looking for whether your editors are really spending an awful lot of time updating the same content in multiple places. Out-of-date content is really obvious. It's old, it's expired. These services, we don't even offer these services anymore. This publication died 3 years ago. Get rid of that. Contact information is a place where everybody fails to remember to keep it up to date. There's somebody left. They used to be the head of marketing. They're gone. and somebody else is there now, but their name isn't on the website. So yeah, that's a good place to look. And then of course all this content that is very up to what we consider needing to be up to date all the time. Your events, your blog posts, your articles. Things change. If you're in the science industry and you have articles posted from 30 years ago, are those articles still valid? Well, yeah, lots of people want to come and see them. Well, do they belong in an archive? Are they still valid? Do they still belong on the website? So you're looking for old stuff that doesn't have, that either was created a long time ago or has a really old modification date. And anything over 2 years old, anything. Now, you may find some incredibly relevant content in there. And you might want to say, well, what do we do with it? People really still want it? Repurpose it. Make a new blog post from it. Redirect the old one to the new one. Change it up a bit. Put a new date on it so that people realize it's new and relevant, and that makes you more credible. And also use a link checker on a regular basis, because a lot of the times we're linking to other people's websites, and at the speed of light right now, things are everyone's redesigning, everybody's leaving the market, coming into the market. Anything you've linked to off-site is probably broken after 2 years. Okay? And the trivial. So content that's not aligned to your top tasks. If you don't know, and this is part of going back to discovery, if you don't know what your audience top tasks are, what they really need to do when they get to your website, there's no way to know whether your content's aligned with them. So this is an opportunity to say, hey, remember when we talked about all these top tasks? What are our content pages that are aligned with those tasks? Or trivial content that doesn't even meet your minimal standards. You're a professional organization. Does the content meet? Are you putting in jokes? Are you speaking in language that doesn't really reflect your brand? So you're going to be looking for time on page. You're going to be looking for page views that are supporting edge cases instead of the core business case. And when I say employ the core model, I'm talking about the intersection between the audience needs and the business needs. So between the tasks the audience needs to do and the objectives that your business has, there's an intersection. And finding those pieces of content in that intersection is really what's going to separate out what's important from what is not. And of course, you're going to act on your rot. You're going to get rid of it. You're going to revise it. You're going to edit it. You're going to also Find out what's missing. Because once you've been through all of this, you go, well, you realize that we don't have any content for this particular audience, or it's all the content we have for an audience is out of date. So you're going to be able to assess gaps better as well. The tools you're going to use, like I said, you can use spreadsheets. I always ask somebody to do me a Drupal view. There are great scraping tools. You've got your analytics. Whatever works. So you don't need to go onto the listserv tomorrow and say, what's the best scraping? I use this. Is there something better? Use what works for you. You're going to have differences of opinions. Everybody wants to use their tool. Everybody's an evangelist for how they do things. Use whatever works. Okay? Then we have the qualitative work. So now I've got this spreadsheet filled out, and I can come up away from the desk. I'm not working alone anymore. It's time to work with other people. I need to make my qualitative work as objective as possible so that along with the quantitative work that we just did, it is seen as valid research. Okay? I don't want anybody's opinion seeping into what I just did. So again, Christina has these qualitative audit factors, and if these work for you, great. And if you want to add more or take some of these out, great as well. Whatever aligns best with your audience. And you want to evaluate each piece of content according to one of the, some of these factors. And you're going to create some rating scale so that it's really obvious. 1 to 5. 1 to 10 if you absolutely have to, but 1 to 5 is better. And you don't allow somebody to say, it's a 1.7. Not allowed. So you have to use whole numbers and rate each piece of content according to each of these and put these onto the spreadsheet. So now you have added some qualitative work in there, but it's backed by a factor. It's backed by something that people can use and objectively compare from one piece of content to the next. Okay, so we're trying to get some accuracy in here as to how good this content is. And then we're going to sit down in a session. It might be one session, it might be many sessions, it might be department by department, but at the beginning, it's one session. And we're going to share out that spreadsheet. We're not going to talk about individual pieces of content. We're not going to call out any departments. We're sharing data. Okay? We're sharing real data now. We're not giving people opinions of, gee, I've been a content strategist for 10 years, and this is what I think should be on your website. No, we're telling them, here's the data to prove it. This is awesome. This is the collaborative part. So we want to start these interactive sessions with reiterating the goals, the audience, the business objectives, the content creation process or lack thereof. And really what we're trying to do here is to build buy-in. This says everyone at the table has an equal say in the content. It's all of our website. Okay? We have an equal say. And we all get a chair. We all get to sit down. And look, there's designers and developers in our content meeting. Why? Why are they there? I love them. I love designers and developers because they know what's worked and what hasn't. They know what's hard to code and what isn't. They know what users are going to complain about. They get it. And they can inform the content process very beautifully. We want the design and the functionality and the content all working together. So we all need to sit together and start talking. It's not time for us to take our spreadsheet and throw it over the cube and put it in the next person's bucket and make it their problem. This is when we all come together. We want people who are doing the copywriting to be in early in the process so they can actually write us copy to test from. How many of you still test with lorem ipsum? Yeah, very few. Because it doesn't work. It's not reality. I literally had somebody email me yesterday and say, is there a 255 character limit to the title in Drupal? It's like, yes. We think we're only getting 250, 250, not 255. Okay. Are you using all 255? They are. They're a government audit. organization. And so their titles of their reports have to follow a certain legal premise. And so you need to know that when you're a designer, right? And if you're a developer and you need to go over 255, heaven forbid, you need to know that too. So we want real content coming into our redesign. And so by having all these people in the room together, we start to create a dialogue where everyone feels that they can speak to the next one about what their role is in putting the content on the site. Okay. The next step in the process is governance. Most organizations do not have a governance plan at all. So there are maybe departments responsible for certain pieces of the website, but there's no understanding of a specific person, how often the content should be reviewed. There's no document that says what the business value is of any particular piece of content, and there's no process for creating it. And it's okay if one department has a different process than another, but we need to document it. You're going to be gone next year. Somebody else is taking your place. We need this process to continue. And when you don't have a process in place and it's not a documented, clear understanding of how we create our content, bringing new people on becomes all that much harder, and therefore keeping your content clean becomes all that much harder. Taking a cue from the publishing world, there is a content lifecycle. Okay? And in order to avoid doing a redesign in the future where you throw everything away and start all over again, if you follow the life cycle, you will get away from hoarding all that extra content. So every piece of content will have an owner, every piece of content will have an audience, and once you follow through, you analyze and plan and create, at some point that published content needs to be archived. At another point it needs to be deleted. And then again, we need to reanalyze. Are we hitting our mark? Has our audience changed? Has their expectations changed? Has our business plan changed? Let's start this again. Analyze over again. Plan again. Tone is another qualitative factor. So if you're a political organization, are you going, for example, to create content that mirrors what's going on in the press? What language and tone are you going to use? Is your SEO going to be better because you're hitting on topics that are fresh in the press right now? I had a client who works in China business relations, and every day they publish dozens of articles that are all relevant to exactly what's going on between U.S.-China trade. Their SEO is enormous because they're following the tone that needs to happen to be credible and be picked up very quickly. They're picked up by Google. If you use jargon, that might be okay. I am saying we can use jargon if our organization lives in the world of jargon. That's fine. But if it doesn't, it's got to go. So really understand what your audience is using and needing, and look across all your content for tone, and are you hitting the tone of the organization? And finally, consistency. Being able to have a regular schedule for content to go out. Leveraging opportunities like things in the news, and becoming a reliable, credible source. So the more consistent, the newer your content is, the more people can rely on you coming out on certain days of the week with new content, the more then your credibility will build. The tools for this are many, and I'm sure you use lots of these at different times, and they're all very relevant. Everything from journey mapping, having editorial calendars, using the spreadsheet for the migration plan, content production workshops, which we lead in order to bring all content creators together and have them collectively build the experience for writing their content. So they actually sit down in a room for hours on end with lots of sticky notes, and everybody's going around learning, well, this is best for me. Oh, I hadn't thought of doing it that way. And coming to a consensus on what their content creation process is. It's a really wonderful thing to interject at this point in time. Whether you're going to use Drupal Workbench or now, Workflow and D8, Whether you're going to start by putting all your stuff in Gather Content or in Word or in directly into Drupal or any other workflow tool, however it is that you're going to start bringing all the new content together, is all part of this tool assessment at this point in time. And as I mentioned before, the core model really fits in well here, where we start to talk strategically about content and say, what is at that intersection between what the business goals are and the high defined user tasks that we came up with during discovery? And can we focus on those pages, if nothing else? If you have time to do nothing else, focus on the pages that are going to bring you the biggest bang for the buck. Okay? And the core model also, I can do a whole session on that, but it also lays the groundwork for architecture and page layouts, because you start talking about how will somebody get to those pages that are at the intersection, and where do we want to lead them from there? What is the call to action that comes off of those pages? So what do we get out of doing all of this work? First of all, usability. Being able to find content through improved navigation, using real live content, not lorem ipsum, to guide the architecture, and enhancing the architecture to align with all your channels. Because while you're doing all of this, you also realize the reusability of your content. If you're on 5 social media channels, how do we do that? How do we architect into the content types fields that will allow us to track what are we posting to Twitter from here, what images are we using on Facebook from this piece of content, and really being able to enhance your architecture to account for all the reuse of the content. Sustainable content is obvious. Being able to create more efficient processes, creating trust in your community through your content. Okay. Cost control, obvious. Maintaining all that content has a cost. Some of the cost is burnout. Other cost is losing clients. So identifying those KPIs that will allow you to measure how your content is doing. And if you're doing this content audit on a rolling basis, you now have all of this. You've already done the hard work when you put the spreadsheet together. You can just continue to use the process. And finally, integrating with marketing, which I included in the slide about around the big table. But when we were at DrupalCon, Dries mentioned very strongly that marketing is what's driving a lot of the advancement in the web right now, and that marketers are really taking over that ownership of the website. So the content strategists and the marketing team really need to be very well integrated at this point in time to ensure that we're really accomplishing the goals of the marketing organization. So now we have this drawer, which I don't mind going into and finding, the pink lip gloss or the purple Sharpie or a set of batteries, because it's all laid out for me. It's all clean. And this seems really obvious because most of you are content strategists and you're like, but this is obvious. You just told us everything we already know. We know we need to get to the clean space. We know we can't hoard. But your job is to be an advocate for this. Your job is to take the tools that we have and advocate for content strategy. This gives you that platform to get your organization to here. So it's not obvious to other people. And you have something to say, and you have something to add to the conversation. So it's important that you learn how to use the facts and use objective measures so that your team feels comfortable having you at the table, that they know that your goals and objectives are perfectly in line with the organization, and that you want to work with the development team in order to make the content more findable and more consumable and usable across channels. And we want to make content strategy the norm in every organization. And by biting off this one little piece, the content audit, and showing the team that you can be objective and quantitative in your approach to content, that gives us all a lot of ammunition to have a seat at that table. So, are there any questions? Yeah. Yes?
If a client approaches you at a fixed timeline and some volume of content, do you have any sort of rules of thumb on estimating the amount of resources that you need to go through this process?
Yeah, it takes... That's when we want to decide what approach to take to auditing the content. We would probably try to look for getting a broad view across the entire site, but taking a sampling of content because we might not be able to get through it all. So based on the amount of time that we have, you can throw lots of resources at it and raise the price, or you can say, let's take a sample and keep the price down. So it's kind of hard. It depends on, obviously, the more money you can throw at it, the better, because doing this up front is going to get you a better product at the end. But we tend to, we have estimators that we use based on numbers of pages and architecture and other things like that, that we kind of try to bring to play and say, okay, the audit's going to take this much time. The content workshop will take this much time. So we have estimators that we use. I'm not sure if do other people have estimators that they use based on amount of content? No? Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, if it's done internally, people will that's going to be their job for the next 6 months, is just to go through the content. But yeah, absolutely, and it can be adjusted, like I said, based on how much content we want to take. Once we know and look at the content, we have a sense of, can we subsample it? Then it's easier to get at that number, so that we're not using an entire budget up just to do content auditing. Okay. Did I see another hand go up? Yes.
I had a question about bounce rates. So when you look at bounce rates, it's tricky because if you have a page that doesn't have much content, if you have a high bounce rate, that might be okay, you got there. But if there's a lot of content, you have a bounce rate that's not. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, the last.
I mean, if you have a page with very little content and you have a quick bounce rate, that means they got there and they found what they wanted and they left. But if you have like more than 3 screen pulls, and then if you have a high bounce rate, you probably got a problem.
Probably, yeah. So the question is about bounce rates and how to assess what they mean, and it is tricky because if you have gotten the person to where they need to be, and they get the information they need and they're off that page really fast, it's actually a good thing. So it is, I like your assessment of, if it's a very long page and there's a quick bounce rate, does it mean there's a problem on that page because there's so much information that they couldn't find their way through it. So you really do have to use bounce rate really carefully in assessing the quality of the content. You might want to use other factors on some pieces of content where that you think, this should be performing better, but there's a high bounce rate. You might want to start looking at other factors to see, why that might be. Any other questions? Yes, gentlemen.
Is there value in making that, like, the metaphorical cardboard box jump that you take up and put in the attic? And I guess if so, like, are there tools that you can use to do that or to manage?
To manage
the, like, I guess it would be called archival, or like, the stuff that's stored up in the attic that, like, keep around just in case, but you probably won't ever use it.
What do we do with the just in case stuff, with the stuff that we decide we want to throw away? Well, there are other methods for holding on to information that aren't your website. And so I would suggest, first of all, that content that no longer belongs on the web, that doesn't have a place any longer, you have other mechanisms in your organization for stashing that away, and it's better off putting it there than leaving it on the site. You don't want Google picking it up. You don't want people stumbling across it. If you archive it, you're still there. So I would say find another mechanism, some other system in your organization for stashing that away. That said, sometimes there's a need for archives. And sometimes there are really, really good reasons to have archives. So have that discussion and conversation and decide what pieces of content really belong in an archive and maybe can be even labeled as an archive. And make sure your archives are very, very searchable by date and topic and taxonomy and whatever else you can, because it's going to amass to a lot of stuff. And then maybe even go through, maybe have a whole separate content strategy effort yearly to go through the archive and say, okay, now what can come out of the archive and go away? Because you can tell, if you can't take the leap, which a lot of organizations can't, going to an intermediary step, which is, creating an archive, and then let's see how that performs. They'll give it 6 months, maybe we'll give it a year. Okay, we'll give it a year, and then see how that performs, and then you have more data to bring back and say, look, we did save it, we put it in, it's time to delete it off the website. We can stash it over here on the server someplace, stash it on the internal, whatever, on SharePoint or whatever it is that you use to keep your internal and documentation. Then it's time for it to go there. So that might be a good intermediary step.
Thank you, Dori.
Yep, I think we're done with time. If you have other questions, please come up. I have cards. I have really awesome logo stickers that Jeff Zeldman told me he adored. So your kids might adore them. They're bunnies. And I'm doing a box. Thank you. I'm actually doing a BOF on mindfulness in the tech space as preparation for a session I'm doing at PHP World. So if you have time on Friday at 2, I'd love to have you there. Thank you.